So it's a really exciting time in cell therapies. There's phenomenal science going on, as you've seen at ISCT, but there absolutely are some key challenges for the field to address. And we've talked about unproven cell therapies, lots going on there, and that's important to address. But let me turn to two other challenges that I think are really critical for cell therapies to reach their potential. And the first is manufacturing. Cells are just so much more complicated than other therapeutic modalities and other things we use to treat health conditions, right? So a small molecule, aspirin, for instance, right? Or even a biologic. Cells are living, they're breathing, they divide, they grow, they die. And using something this complicated as a drug, well, it has great potential and there's so much reason to be excited, but it is so complicated, right? And I think what that really means is that the scientists, the firms developing these therapies have to put a ton of attention to manufacturing, because you really need to know what these cells are, what you've done to these cells before you're ready to transplant them, to inject them, to infuse them into the patient, right? And one, this is just critical science. So you know that you've done the best you can to make these cells likely to help the patient. It's also just, compliance with the regulatory authorities, FDA or the health authorities around the world absolutely want to know exactly what's being put into patients. And that's to minimize risk and to maximize likelihood of, this helping patients. And I think the field has a long ways to go here, right? There's been a ton of improvements made, but this is so complicated. And the process of drug development doesn't always support enough attention to manufacturing. You get a promising development in the lab, probably at a university. It's being manufactured in a one-off or a two-off, right? You're making a few doses. It's labor intensive, probably led by grad students or postdocs. And you get to this promising result, but the transition from that to industrial scale and industrial practices is a place where the field has stumbled. And so I think really more attention is needed there. I think it's happening, right? There's a number of initiatives from Catapult in the UK to CMAT in the United States that I'm involved with that are working on this, but it's a challenge. And the ordering of that, when you invest in manufacturing versus when you have the promising therapy and get the funding for it, has been a real challenge for the field. The other key challenge that I want to bring is the idea of workforce. Cell therapy is labor intensive. Cell therapy manufacturing, cell therapy production is labor intensive. And I don't think the field has quite made it to the point that it's ready to be successful yet in this regard. I think it's maybe most instructive to look at this in CAR T-cell therapy, right? To date, these are all autologous therapies. So we're not really talking about scale up where we produce millions of doses, but scale out where we produce individual doses for hopefully eventually millions of patients, right now, thousands of patients. But this is very labor intensive in the manufacturing space. And it requires and will increasingly require a large number of what you might call sort of middle skilled workforce. These are not typically PhD biomedical engineers, but maybe folks with technical degrees, really good GMP compliance, really good at sort of working within the standard operating procedures, the SOPs, right? Dealing with, those events that occur when something goes out of spec in manufacturing. Right? And I think there's a really global need to scale up education at this sort of middle skill technical level to support the growth of this industry. Again, there are groups working on this, some of the same I mentioned. We're thinking about this certainly within CMAT. ISCT is thinking about this as a society and how we can support it. But it's going to be a really pressing need. If you look at CAR T, the early development, the early approvals were for, last resort therapies, for instance, pediatric ALL, it's, relapsed after prior therapy, a very small population. But we just saw an approval for multiple myeloma, still a fourth line therapy for multiple myeloma, but multiple myeloma is a much larger indication. And quickly, I think we're going to see a number of follow-ons moving closer to the front lines or to bigger, patient populations. And the manufacturing is going to become critical and the workforce is going to become critical. So I think that's a big challenge for the field to move forward.